Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Linux and open source news show. This week we've got reports that Android is working on bringing full graphical and hardware accelerated Linux applications to the platform, meaning that at some point you might be able to replace the default Android apps with a bunch of Plasma Mobile, GNOME Mobile, or whatever else applications on your phone, which is pretty cool. We also have the release of Plasma 6.5 and a bunch of power savings that it enables that have been more explained in detail this week. We also have Zorin OS doing big download numbers with the end of Windows 10 and a bunch of other Linux, open source, privacy, and open web related discussion topics. So we all know that Google is trying to merge Chrome OS with Android, and one thing that Chrome OS does but Android doesn't do quite well is running Linux applications. Latest versions of Android did let you run Linux command line apps in the new Android terminal app that they developed, but graphical apps were not supported, and in the most recent betas or release candidates of Android, you could run graphical applications, Linux graphical applications on Android, but using software rendering, meaning it's all pretty slow and not really usable in a lot of cases. But it seems that in the latest Canary builds of Android, they added a hidden option to their terminal, which is currently how you launch all those Linux apps, to enable graphical acceleration. And this hidden option will be enabled by default on Pixel 10 phones, and potentially it will be exclusive to these phones at first, although there is no reason why this couldn't come to any Android device in the future. This GPU acceleration is based on GFX Stream, which is a hardware-agnostic API, so technically any phone should be able to work with that. Now it is far from ready because apparently only 47 Vulkan extensions that are used to power this hardware acceleration are currently available to the Linux virtual machine in Android out of the 142 that the Pixel 10 supports. And even among those 47 extensions, some of them just don't work properly yet, even sometimes performing worse than the software renderer would be. It is still a pretty interesting thing to follow. It's far from ready, but it will be pretty cool to be able to just run any Linux app you want with full graphical acceleration, so real good performance. This means that if you really want a Linux phone, but you don't want to give up the wealth of Android applications, open source through F-Droid, or just everything from the Google Play Store, well, you'll probably be able to. You'll be able to install the KDE Plasma mobile apps, the GNOME mobile apps, and run these as the backbone of your Android experience, and then just add the Android apps that you actually really need and don't have a Linux counterpart. And it also enables you to just use your phone as a full-blown Linux computer, which would be pretty neat as well. So I think this might be the bridge we're missing in terms of having a fully Linux phone without all the Android stuff on top, because if we're able to replace that with actual Linux apps, I think that's gonna be suitable for a lot of people. Now this week we also got the release of Plasma 6.5. I already made a full video about it, so I'm just going to give you the TLDR here. You've got rounded corners on the bottom of Windows when using the Breeze theme. You can disable that if you don't want that. You've got more resizable sidebars across the desktop. You've got day and night cycle support for automatically changing the wallpaper and the global theme based on your location and the time of day. You can star elements in the clipboard to get access to them further. You've got many improvements to KRunner, which will find stuff a bit more readily. You've got much improved Wayland support for drawing tablets, for the picture-in-picture protocol, for the pointer warp protocol, for screencasting a specific window, and for overlay planes, which apparently grant you a bunch of power savings as well. As Xavier Hugel, a developer working on Kwin, did some testing, and you can gain from 45 minutes to 1 hour of battery life when you enable this option in Plasma 6.5. This is an option that disables compositing on full screen windows, like for example playing a video from a browser or locally full screen, or playing a video game. And with this compositing disabled, you just free up the GPU, you free up some amount of CPU as well, and so you're just saving some power and some battery life as well, which is pretty neat. Still in Plasma 6.5, you've got many accessibility-related improvements, and you've got a brand new permissions page in the system settings that lets you configure the permissions that you'd expect to see at first glance, like, for example, blocking the screen lock and sleep, enabling or disabling notifications, game mode, high CPU priority, camera access, location, screen sharing, and the like, and you still have access to the full Flatpak permissions if you want that as well. Now that's just the tip of the iceberg. You'll need to watch my full video on those changes if you really want to know all that Plasma 6.5 has. I published it on Tuesday, I think. But just these performance improvements, or at least battery life savings, would be pretty cool. They're not enabled by default. Apparently, you need to enable an environment variable for Kwin to have that enabled. But it's still pretty neat, and apparently it's just the beginning. Things will improve further in the future as well. So pretty encouraging for the battery life of our Linux desktops. Apart from that, though, Plasma 6.5 is a very nice, very polished new release that aims to bring things closer together, unify the UI, bring you more option. It's just a really neat update, and I personally can't wait to get it on my system running Tuxedo OS. Now, apparently, Xubuntu's website was compromised over the previous weekend, and it served malware to users who tried to download that distro. The torrent for the ISO, instead of letting you the usual disk image that you'd expect, downloaded a file called xubuntu-safe-download.zip, which is a red flag in itself. No developer puts safe in the name of their files. And of course, inside that zip was a .exe, so a Windows executable file, and a text file with terms of service, which again is not what you would expect from a Linux distro. Now, of course, as soon as the team was informed, the download page was taken down. The ISO file itself was not modified or altered. The checksums weren't modified either, so it was only the torrent download that was hacked, apparently through the WordPress backend of the Xubuntu website. The link was there for a day or two at most. I'm pretty sure most people who would download a Linux distro would probably be aware that this is not what you're supposed to get, especially people going for Xubuntu, because people who want specifically XFCE are probably tech savvy enough to know that you should not get an exe file that is called safe download when you're trying to get a Linux distro. Still, it could have gotten a few newcomers that were coming from Windows and didn't expect that or didn't know what they were expecting. But again, if you're looking into Linux specifically, you probably know at least that you're supposed to get a disk image that you flash onto a USB stick. And an exe is not a disk image, but who knows, maybe some people were gotten over that, so I'm just mentioning it here, so you know that potentially you might have downloaded something wrong. Now, things are back to normal now, and it should be safe again to download Xubuntu with their torrent link. Still on Linux distros, Zorin OS 18 was released last week. It's an interesting Linux distro, but they apparently are seeing a lot of success, probably due to the end of Windows 10, and Zorin OS offering an experience that can pretty much mimic that operating system's shell, at least on the surface. They use GNOME plus extensions, and it sort of can look like Windows XP, Windows 98, Windows 11, Windows 10, whatever you want. They say they passed 100,000 downloads in 48 hours, and that over 72% of these downloads were made from a Windows device. Now, we don't really have other download data from other distributions to compare and see if they got the same kind of surge in download numbers, but I guess StatCounter might tell us about that at the end of the month. And in November, we'll see if Linux actually gained a lot of market share or if it's just a blip on the radar. Apparently, Zorin OS 18 was discussed by a big channel called Explaining Computers. Their video on Zorin OS 18 got 140,000 views, so this probably helped push the distro as well. It probably was mentioned by a bunch of Linux channels as well, and it's generally taken as a good example of, hey, you're using Windows, you can migrate to Linux relatively easily with Zorin OS, because Zorin OS markets itself towards newcomers, beginners. They offer a bunch of options that let you mimic the layout of another operating system. And on their website, they generally avoid all the Linux jargon. They don't really mention their upstreams or where they got this feature or that feature. They just say, hey, in this release, we added this, that. Wherever it comes from, GNOME, systemd, whatever, they just lump it all together, which is sort of unfair for the upstream projects, but also makes it a lot easier to read and understand for someone who doesn't know anything about Linux. Anyway, even if it's just a one-time influx of 100,000 downloads, which might translate in, I don't know, 10,000 people sticking with Linux, that's still a big bump in user numbers for us, and that's always nice to see. Hopefully, other distros saw the same kind of bump with the end of Windows 10 and people deciding that Windows 11 is just too bad and they prefer moving to Linux instead. This week, the Fedora Council approved the proposed policy on the inclusion of AI-generated code and tools inside of the distro. This was proposed a while back, and I think it is a sensible policy. Basically, what it boils down to is, yes, you can use AI tools for work on Fedora and Fedora projects, whether it's for code, documentation, anything really, but the person submitting that work must be its true author in a responsibility sense. The person who submits the code or the documentation or whatever takes full responsibility for that contribution, and they must make sure that there are no licensing problems, accuracy problems, or safety problems. Authors must also disclose when AI contributed a significant part of that work. Fedora suggests using a assisted by AI tool name here, Comet Trailer, to let people understand where this actually came from and that AI was involved in the creation of such thing. Reviewers and maintainers can also use AI for reviews, but a human must always make and own up to the final decision. So it's not automated review, there's always someone stamping their name on that review and that decision. As per adding AI features inside of Fedora, it is allowed as well, but user consent is mandatory for every single AI-powered feature. Whether it calls to something in the cloud or runs locally, the user will need to say, yes, I do want that, which is nice. Nothing will be enabled by default. Now, this policy might evolve in the future. This is a living document, as most policies are, but I think it is a sensible one. You're just asking people whether they want to use AI or not, so you can avoid the potential privacy problem, but also the ethical and licensing problems that come with using AI features. As per including AI-generated code or documentation inside of Fedora, as long as it is mentioned in the actual comments that this used AI, the person submitting it understands what they created, is able to debug it and explain it. I don't really see a problem. I'd rather not have unethical AI-generated code in my project, because all AI-generated code is inherently unethical, in my opinion. It's been built on the back of projects that never gave their permissions to be used for training. But at least it is disclosed and people can make the decision they want based on that. You can decide to leave Fedora if you don't want AI code in your distro, or you can decide that it's good enough for you and you don't care because actually a human verified things. So you have the choice and the information, which I think is what matters here. Now, Ubuntu's move to the Rust core utilities is apparently yielding some problems, most notably breaking unattended upgrades. Now, you might know that Ubuntu 25.10 replaced the GNU core utils by equivalents written in Rust. That transition seemed okay. There were a few reports of performance problems, but nothing too serious. Although there is one issue that is serious, and that's with the date-r command. This command is used to get the last modification date of a file, and it can apparently report the wrong date. This has been fixed upstream, but the fix has not yet been pulled into Ubuntu 25.10, meaning unattended upgrades are broken on Ubuntu 25.10 because, well, you use that command to check for the last update date and compare it with today's date, and apparently that difference always returns 0 on Ubuntu 25.10 right now, so updates are actually never started. The bug report has been pushed to critical security levels because it does prevent systems from being updated when the user would expect them to be updated because they turned on unattended upgrades. In the meantime, users will have to manually run the usual apt update and apt upgrade commands manually. Now, it was expected that these tools would show some problems. They're just replacing an entire set of the default command line utilities for Linux, so even if you're trying to build them exactly the same, there are going to be some differences here and there. It's a shame that this one was not noticed during testing. It is pretty important. It feels like a big oversight. Hopefully Ubuntu can fix it later, and at least that problem won't be pulled into the next LTS, which would have been a bigger problem, I think, because most servers that benefit from unattended upgrades, most headless devices, are probably sticking to LTS releases anyway. Now, snap packages might not be my favorite packaging format, but it would be dishonest to say that they haven't gotten better over the years, with a better permission system and fixes for the most glaring performance issues or visual issues coming on a regular basis. And maybe that's why GIMP now has an official snap package. Instead of the community-maintained one, they will now maintain this snap as an effort, as they say, to expand GIMP's availability through the de facto standards and distro-agnostic formats. Because yes, let's be honest, Snap is a de facto standard, because it is the default packaging format for Ubuntu, which is one of the biggest Linux distros out there. This official Snap is based on the one that the Snap Crafters community maintained, and its ownership was transferred to the GIMP project. It apparently took a few months, which surprised me because I would have thought this was an easy process. This snap will change a bit, though compared to its usual incarnation, it won't include any plugins by default, because GIMP's stance is just ship the vanilla app, which makes sense. They instead made a plugin interface that lets you install plugins without breaking the Snap sandbox. I love to see developers taking ownership of various packages and just taking over the distribution of their software. I will always trust the original developers of an application more than any third-party maintainer on any distro. I know that's not the case for everyone in the Linux community, but personally, I want stuff straight from the source, not with a middleman who packaged it and potentially made changes. And the fact of the matter is, Ubuntu is a gigantic distro, has a major user base, and they want to use snaps. So if you're an app developer and you have a snap package that is community maintained, if you have time and resources, it's probably better to just take ownership of that package and distribute it yourself. Now, we already saw a bunch of web browsers tack on some AI features on top of the regular browser, with chatbot sidebars and right-click menu options and preferences that let you choose which chatbot you want to rely on, if any. But we've now been graced by a brand new AI-first browser called Atlas, coming from OpenAI. Now, fortunately, as Linux users, we are spared from it, because for now it is macOS only, and they say it's going to be coming to Windows, iOS, and Android. They don't really mention Linux, so maybe we're not even going to get it, which is fine in my book. Because in this browser, the chatbot is baked into the entire browsing experience. You view both a web page and a ChatGPT transcript visible at all times. It's exactly like having the sidebar inside the browser, but it goes a bit further, because that assistant can take control of the mouse pointer and do all the navigation for you, which is likely why they don't have a Linux version, because I'm pretty sure that under Wayland there is no way for an application to actually control the pointer in your stead, but maybe I'm wrong. The URL bar also works as a Ask ChatGPT text field, on top of also being a regular URL bar, but all in all, it doesn't feel like a very different way of doing AI in a browser, apart from the thing controlling your computer if you ask it to. So I would personally never give control of my entire pointer and navigation experience to an AI chatbot. They already can't be trusted to give you accurate information. I would not trust them to add stuff to my cart and pay for me and send stuff to the right address or to book a vacation or whatever else. But I do see one potential very useful use case, and that's for accessibility. If you can just ask a chatbot to do something for you because you don't have the physical ability to use a mouse properly, or just using a screen reader is way too convoluted with plenty of websites that just don't support it well, plenty of browsers that just don't work well with it, having the assistant being able to just navigate the website for you, click the right buttons, launch the thing and give you feedback on it would probably be a lifesaver, or at least a game changer for people with disabilities. So that's pretty cool. But on the other hand, I would never trust an AI chatbot to do all of that stuff for me, because they are known to be absolutely horrendous in decision making, factual information, and just assessing the context they're on. So personally, I'm not touching that thing with a 10-foot pole. Fortunately, it's not even on Linux, so it's not like I could run it anyway. But also, according to some experts, these AI-first browsers are a security problem. The crux of the issue is exactly that automated AI control of your navigation, where ChatGPT grabs control of the mouse pointer on your behalf, because that built-in AI agent is vulnerable to prompt injection. The website you're visiting can hide some malicious instructions that the agent will then follow. Now, the report talking about this was published initially by Brave. That's a competing browser which is probably going to get eaten by those AI-first browsers, or at least severely threatened by them, so take this with a grain of salt. But this is something that will apply to all AI-powered browsers. They just increase the attack surface compared to a regular browser. The report indicates that the AI agent uses the contents of the web page itself to act and decide where to go with that mouse pointer and which actions to complete, and this can obviously be exploited by malicious code, malicious sentences, or even malicious comments. So of course, unless you have a very strong security framework around that AI-assisted navigation, it probably isn't a good idea to do it. I'm pretty sure at some point we can implement some features that actually ask the user when the chatbot detects that it's being given a new instruction that might do something that wasn't planned initially or make it deviate. Maybe it could prompt the user for, hey, I received this instruction, do you really want me to follow it or not? This probably can be avoided, but right now I would really not use that unless you absolutely need to for some reason, but you probably don't because you've been using computers without it previously, so it's probably not fully necessary right now. And finally this week we got a big study about AI. It's the same study that was ran previously by the European Broadcast Union and the BBC, and it indicates that AI assistants really misrepresent the news in 45% of their answers, which is a pretty high percentage. So it's the BBC that is leading this. They're evaluating more than 3,000 responses from ChatGPT, from Copilot, from Gemini, and from Perplexity to measure accuracy, sourcing, understanding of context, and the ability to differentiate opinions from fact while the chatbot is analyzing a piece of news. And the results really point to AI assistants being unsuitable for giving you the news. 45% of them had at least one significant issue. 31% of answers had serious sourcing problems, as in it attributed the information to an incorrect source, it misquoted things, it was misleading, or it missed important information altogether. And 20% of answers contained a major problem, like hallucinated information or fully outdated information that has since then been updated or changed. Apparently, Gemini was the worst of the bunch, with 76% of answers containing problems due to really bad sourcing. This is actually the second time the BBC ran such a study, and they do point out that results have improved compared to the previous one, but the errors are just way too prevalent still. The research team not only ran that study, but also released a News Integrity in AI Assistance toolkit, which aims to help AI providers solve these issues. And they're also trying to work with regulators to make sure that the current laws on information integrity that might exist in various countries are also applicable to AI tools, because they are apparently becoming very prevalent as a news source for a lot of people. It would make sense to hold these AI assistants to the same standards as any news outlets if people are starting to use AI assistants instead of visiting news websites. This does not mean that anything will be fully factual. There are plenty of news outlets that just peddle misinformation, just factually are wrong or misquote stuff or are fully biased, and AI will have the exact same problems, but at least you could hold them legally responsible for anything like defamation or misquoting you, and they would have to retract and modify those statements like any news outlet would if they are deemed responsible for actual misinformation. I think that would be a good thing. Now, of course, this study is ran by news publishers like the BBC, which obviously are at odds with most AI large language models because they've been trained on their news articles and content generally without permission or compensation, so they are kind of forced to represent those AI tools as being problematic for that. But I do trust the numbers here because in my experience, those AI assistants are just really bad at giving you factual information, well-sourced, well-explained. They just misrepresent a lot of stuff. And currently, I find AI assistants fully incapable of working for this task, which is a problem because a lot of people think they are trustworthy when they really, really are not. And if you want to fact check everything that the AI gives you, it takes as much time as just doing your research on the normal web, which means that those tools just don't save you any time. Okay, let's end this video on this message from our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. Tuxedo makes laptops and desktops that ship with Linux pre-installed. They actually pick the hardware for all of their devices so that it's very Linux compatible, and if there are still some quirks here and there or some stuff that needs extra support, they add it in their repos, which you can add to a variety of distros to make sure that you have the light bar support, the keyboard highlight color settings, and all that jazz. They have plenty of options for all price points, all power levels, and virtually every form factor that you might want. I personally only rely on their computers these days. Everything you hear, see, or read, or whatever I make basically is done on one of their laptops, and all my gaming is done on one of their desktops. As always, the link is down in the description. So thank you all for watching or listening to this video in the background. You know where all the usual YouTube buttons are. You can like, you can subscribe, you can turn on notifications, write a comment, anything that helps with the algorithm. You know why those things are here and why you should use them. You can also find all the links that I use to write this show down in the description and links to support the show as well. Thank you all for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!